I was a first pilot on a Pathfinder C-47, and we had specially trained navigators and paratroopers that would drop in and identify the drop zones for the serials of troop carrier coming afterwards. We started briefing in May 28th with sand tables with our paratroopers, and two requirements in the Pathfinders was one, the colonel tore up your instrument card when you joined, and he said, I'll fly with you and give you a new instrument card before D-Day. And second was, you're going to drop in practice with the stick you're going to drop in combat. So we felt a different relationship with our paratroopers than the normal troop carrier pilots did, because there were only 20 crews that went into Normandy. There were 9 planes dropped Pathfinder troopers for the 101st, 9 planes dropped paratroopers for the 82nd Airborne, and then 2 planes dropped paratroopers to set up the drop zones or the landing zones for the gliders, because the first glider came in right at dawn, and by that time we were back home in bed. So, you know, we were at the tip of the spear, as you say. Yeah. Yeah, had anxiousness. I don't think there was fear. We didn't have time to be scared. We were too busy. But we had the responsibility, after all, like a fighter pilot has just himself to worry about. We had a crew of 5 and 18 paratroopers, and I had an extra passenger aboard as a military intelligence observer who I kept in track with after the war was over. Neat guy, Walt McElroy. But it was, they were parlous times, as they would say. But we were a great group, picked and trained beautifully. But our navigators were trained by the Royal Air Force, Pathfinders, and all we were chauffeurs for them, really. You had a $100,000 airplane with $500,000 worth of radar in it. So, you know, yes, we were important, but the real important guy was the navigator.
Sure.
And the jump master. You know, well, you earned your Pathfinder wings, and you earned them in combat. And we were 20 crews, as I say, and then a little after D-Day, 10 of us went down to Italy for the south of France invasion. And we flew that, came back, and then we prepared for Market Garden, which we all call Montgomery's mistake. But that was a disaster for the British. The 82nd and the 101st did pretty well, held airlines. But it was the Arnhem operation was a disaster. That British Airborne Division got absolutely cut to ribbons. I think they started out with 12,000 in the division. They ended up 1,200. A lot were taken prisoners, a lot were killed. I had a wonderful crew. Big Stan Beer with my co-pilot. He was a great guy. We trained together in the old 436, and when I could take my crew with me, I could take everybody with me but my navigator. And the navigator was supplied. It turned out I was lucky. I got a navigator who was from our group, but a different squadron. And Carl Jones got the nickname G-Box Jones because the British called the Shoran the G-Box. Of course, that G-Box was this big and the scope and everything. Today, GPS is this big. It does everything. You know. When we left England, we went over the channel at minimum altitude to get below German radar, and we flew at 50 feet above the water. Pulled up when we hit the German coast and made our turn in. And as we were climbing up, we discovered that there was a cloud bank over the area of our drop zones. But we couldn't break radio silence, unfortunately. If we had, that whole drop in Normandy would have been much different. But our colonel was ahead of us, and 9 planes were ahead of us, and I was in plane number 14. And we hit the cloud bank, and I separated a little bit. We pulled up, and I was just about to rejoin the group from the cloud bank, and my navigator said, "Don't move, you're perfect." So we dropped at about 35 to 40 seconds different than the flight commander in the left wing plane, and we found out later that we were within 99% perfect, all three of us, in drop zone T for tear, and that was just to the west of Saint-Mary-Glise. And in pulling out, I dropped, once we got the shroud lines in and everything, I dropped on the deck and went out. My co-pilot said, "You better lift your right wing or you're going to take the steeple off at the church in Saint-Mary-Glise." So we did that. My navigator gave me a heading for Marcouf Island off Utah Beach. And I said, "Marcouf Island," to myself. Ooh, we got briefed that was a nest of anti-aircraft guns. We went over Marcouf at 200 miles an hour, and good old rattling goody bird, not a gun fired at us. We found out later that the underwater demolition team for the Navy had gone in and spiked all the guns. So that was very happy. Then we pulled up, and my navigator said, "Skipper, come back here a minute." So I came back and I looked at his FBI scope, and you could look like you could walk from England to the coast of France. All the dots on the radar from boats. Unbelievable. And I said, wow. You started to get what the immensity of what we were involved in. So I said to my co-pilot, I said, "Stan, you go back and take a look at this." We discussed it later, and he said, that was our first realization of what an unbelievably large operation it was, and the planning that went in. And it was all done within 2 years. It was amazing. It was dicey on Omaha Beach for a bit, but all the other beaches seemed to be pretty well under control. Utah Beach particularly, even though the Navy dropped about 1,000 yards south of there. Young Teddy Roosevelt was the assistant division commander, got out with his walking stick and said, "The war starts here." And he was given the Medal of Honor and was slated to take over a division, had a heart attack and died. And it's one of the few cases where his father, old Teddy Roosevelt, and he both got the Medal of Honor. I was home. I was home on the ground, probably having breakfast, steak and eggs, and we'd been through our debriefing, and I was ready to hit the sack, get a little sleep, and that's old brother led all the other C-47s with the serials and everything in, and they have their rightful place in history, just as we do, but I'm the last living Pathfinder. Our colonel's gone, everybody's gone, Jake, Luck, everybody. Well, time will do it. You know, I'm 96 years old. I'm going to be 97 in July. And, you know, you can't live forever. Met a guy yesterday who was 104 who did 480 missions across the hump in China. Wow, if that isn't a war, I don't know what is. He had to fight both the Japanese and the weather. And I don't know which was worse. I didn't fly out in that part of the world, thank heavens. It's very significant because it's almost the end of it. I'm not sure that there's going to be another, I don't think the 80th, for instance. I wonder if there'll be anybody left who was actually involved in it. You just wonder. That's why I think the predominance of the emphasis is going into the 75th, as it should, as it should. And when I was asked to participate to the degree I am, I was more than glad to do it, and honored and humbled, yeah. Well, I think they use me as an example of what education should do. The kids today, and I know this because my son is a school teacher and teaches history of the United States from 1900 to the modern day. And his study of World War I and World War II are thorough. And his graduates, they know. But I look at the average school kid, and you ask today through this country, what about D-Day? They say, what's D-Day? That's an embarrassment, I think, but it's part and parcel of what the country is. Well, I'd like them to understand what it meant. And it was the culmination of our effort to eliminate Hitler, especially from France, who had been an ally of this country for years, and who some people say we saved in World War I, and that was a mutual effort, just as World War II was a mutual effort, you know. We had Canadian help, British help, French, Polish, and a lot of people don't realize it, but Brazil had a couple of regiments. Well, it's great to see it the way they were in my day. And of course, in my first day, my first ride in an airplane was in a DC-3 from New York to Boston for Thanksgiving in 1934. And different airplane, but they came out of the same line in Santa Monica. And I know because when I got to Alliance, Nebraska as a second lieutenant, I was a co-pilot. We went down to the plant in Santa Monica, picked up new planes, picked them up because we only had 4 planes in the group, and eventually we had 6 airplanes in each squadron. Wow, it was great. And then eventually we got full complement, and we ended up with a lot of airplanes in the group. 4 squadrons, and you had about 28 airplanes in each squadron. It was quite a group. There were a lot of C-47s went across D-Day. I think the figure was close to 445 C-47s led by That's All Brother. And we only had 20 airplanes go in ahead of them in the Pathfinders. But we did our job and they did their job. And it wasn't the fault of really ours, but the Germans had flooded the Murder-Red River, and it was, instead of being a little country stream, spread out over the fields, and was hidden because of the grass. Didn't know the water was there. And they've taken oblique photo reconnaissance, they would have spotted it, but they took directly 90-degree verticals, and that was a mistake. Oh, it was a marvelous airplane. It made history because, as I say, it was the first commercial transport that made air transportation economically feasible and started an industry that today is unbelievable. But it also, for pilots, was a very forgiving airplane. It was good flying on weather. It held ice very well. It carried troopers. It would carry a load. It did a lot. It was a workhorse. Real workhorse. And as I say, they ought to make one in solid gold and put it on a mountain somewhere in honor of Donald Douglas. And I was fortunate luck of flying 2 wars. I flew 2 wars in Douglas airplanes and Pratt & Whitney engines, and I felt very lucky. Oh, I think there is. Oh, I think there is. After you get to fly the same airplane for a while, and it becomes yours, to the point where you can eventually put your name or whatever tag on it. In Pathfinders, we couldn't do that. Couldn't even put our names under the windows. No. Tail number and eventually a large number in the front. That was all that was allowed. In 1960, I went to Normandy, yes. And the museum at Saint-Mary-Église hadn't even been built. Now they've got a museum there, and I can't wait to go there because I understand one wing is on nothing but the Pathfinders. They have pictures of all 20 crews and some memorabilia. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, yeah. Don't want to have any really preconceived ideas, but you can't help but remember what happened originally and then on your last visit. And it's going to be interesting to see the differences and the changes. The French, outside of Paris, I should say, love the Americans. And I've been fortunate. The French decorated me with the Legion of Honor, and I'm going to wear that medal with pride over there in France. And I'm looking forward to it because there'll be some others too. And I've heard, I don't know if it's true, that the President of the United States and the President of France are going to be there, and they're going to have World War II veterans on the stage with the President. Absolutely. There's a big ceremony going to be there on June 6th, right at the cemetery, which is where the old strip used to be. There are 9,200 crosses and Stars of David in that cemetery. And it probably brings tears to my eyes to go there. I'm a relatively sentimental human being, but I have tremendous feeling. Although we were very fortunate in Pathfinders, we didn't lose a person in our unit. One plane ditched before it got there, being shot down by the Germans off the Channel Islands. But they stepped off with wet feet onto a British Corvette, or a Canadian Corvette, with the paratroopers. And those poor paratroopers had to go ashore on an LST. I'm sure they got plenty of ribbing from their buddies, but they got into combat, and our boys eventually came home, had quite a story to tell. They say the food aboard British naval vessels was horrible. I remember that. It's the story.